Okay, we have time for 2 more questions.
Please.
Hello. I have a question about the right to return. So many initiatives talk about right of return, but it's still to whom exactly? To the refugee of 48 or 67 or other years? And I have another question about statelessness and the gap, the legal gap in the international law according the Palestinian statelessness. And what's the aspect, like here in Europe we call stateless, and what's the legal link actually to Palestine in that case, if we have right to return?
Well, in terms of the right of return, again, it flows from the logic of the of our plan. You know, any refugee from Palestine has a right of return as a returning citizen, and that includes Jews and Palestinians. Now, in fact, there aren't any Jewish refugees from Palestine, so it's a mute question, and all the people coming back would be Palestinian. On the other hand, Jews in Amsterdam, you know, that today have the right to go automatically to Israel and get citizenship, that would end, of course. Jews in Amsterdam would be considered Dutch citizens who, who, if they want to immigrate to the new country, would go through a normal process of immigration. But that's true of Palestinian communities that aren't refugee communities. There's large Palestinian communities, let's say in Latin America especially, that got to Latin America in the 1920s, way before this issue emerged. They're not refugees. So in principle, that same principle would apply. That if I'm a Palestinian in Chile, and I want to immigrate to Palestine, then I would have to go through normal immigration procedures. So, you know, it makes sense in that way. It doesn't break down Palestinians and Jews, it breaks down refugees and non-refugees. Having said that, if we're going to really set up a state, it has to be done in good faith. Which means that, you know, we're not enemies anymore. And we're sensitive to each other's histories and needs and so on. So I would suggest, I mean, you know, this is in the future, but, you know, I would suggest that in the new parliament, there would not be opposition to the idea that if, in fact, there were Jewish communities in the world that were genuinely being persecuted, or Palestinian communities in the world that are generally being, I mean, that's possible too. Like in Honduras, for example. That those populations would have a special kind of a right to ask for asylum or ask for repatriation. In other words, that there would be a special dispensation, let's say, for Jews or Palestinians that are in genuine need that would want to come to the country. I think that kind of an exception wouldn't be a problem. Otherwise, again, I think it's fairly clear that it has to do with citizenship versus non-citizens who want to immigrate. The second part.
Okay, I will add something. In fact, if we go to international law and human rights law, and this is when I start my presentation, I said the only refugee in the world who is the only one have no right to return. It doesn't mean the law doesn't give him the right to return. No. There is one article, and I want you to Google it. It's called Article 1D, which is to define the Palestinian refugees than others. This is why the children of the Palestinian refugees and grandchildren remain refugees, because of their parents have the right to return, even, to stay, to live there, or to live back. Like like now, I'm a Swiss, 38 years I wasn't able, I doesn't have the right to go, although I'm born in Palestine, my family is there, etc. Oh, okay, this is another story. So the Palestinian refugee, in fact, according to Resolution 194, if we go to the origin, to 11 December 1948, have the right to return back to their villages and homes of origin. This is why the UNRWA created, and the mandate was just 3 years, to help the Palestinians to go back, in fact. This is why each 3 years, the international community have to convene a conference for UNRWA to look for funding to refund, because nobody solved the problem. Still, the problems remain. This is why the Israelis trying, to block this issue. And this is why all peace process, all the projects, give me any example, they stop when it's reached refugees and Jerusalem. So this is the definition of the Palestinian refugees. This is why Palestinian refugees, children, grandchildren, remain refugees according to international law because of this specified issue, in fact.
Okay, considering I saw quite a few hands raised, we'll do some bonus rounds.
My name is Daphne Meijer. I'm with A Different Jewish Voice, and I would like to go back to the one-state solution reality. How can it come about? And I'm thinking of the ANC, which at some point during the 80s went into exile and formed a government in waiting. Is it an idea to form a government in waiting for the future state where Jews, Israelis, Palestinians can live together?
Well, maybe. We're not there yet. What the ANC also did was draft a constitution before the end of apartheid. And we're not there yet. We're just at the beginning of the process. But in terms of strategy, how to get there, I think definitely we have to take a page out of the book of the ANC. Because, there's a lot of differences between Israel, Palestine, and South Africa, of course. But one of the major similarities is that the ANC knew that the whites in South Africa as a whole were not going to be partners in dismantling apartheid. So they had to develop a strategy that bypassed that whole community and their government. So the strategy was a direct tie between the ANC and the international civil society. Not governments, because governments weren't on their side either. And then, and then to create the international civil society with an end game. This is crucial. The ANC always had an end game. It was one person, one vote. That was so. Anything we did with South Africa, we knew where it was going. And when Mandela, when de Klerk, made several offers to Mandela. There would be power sharing, there would be different houses of parliament, there would be this and be that. Mandela just had the idea, no, one person, one vote. So it was very clear where we were going and what was not acceptable. So we have to, I think, understand, we do understand, we're not naive, the Israeli Jewish public is not going to be a partner in creating a single state, in dismantling Israeli apartheid. 97%, if not 98% or 99% of Israeli Jews would never even consider a one-state solution, let alone be opposed to it. It's just in the stratosphere for them. So that we have to take that into account, and that's why I think we have to develop a Palestinian version of the ANC, a Palestinian-based political group that then goes directly to the international civil society. I said in my talk that I think the Palestinian issue has achieved the proportions abroad of the anti-apartheid struggle. So we're not starting from scratch. You're mobilized. The BDS movement is mobilized. There are thousands of groups all over the world that exist, that are mobilized. So, but what they're missing is that end game. Like I said, they're missing the end game, and they're missing the Palestinian leadership. Because without the Palestinians, you don't have any, and I don't have any authority to move forward. So, so that's sort of the conditionality of this of the whole thing. But I think that if the Palestinians get their act together, and we develop this one-state alternative, I think we can mobilize, and fairly quickly. I mean, I don't see this as a long future. Ronnie and I have a joke that we've developed, you know, this thing about Herzl. You know, Herzl in 1897 at the First Zionist Conference said in 50 years there will be a Jewish state. And it was almost to the day, 50 years there was. I say, and I get up and I'll say, in 10 years there'll be this new one state. Because I think we're closer to the tipping point that we know. You know, I think it's true in the international community, especially the people, churches and trade unions and intellectuals and activist groups, students have mobilized for Palestine. Where they're struggling and where they're stuck is that they're not getting that leadership and that end game. If we can manage to insert that, then I think we could mount a very effective and successful movement actually for one state. That's why I don't think this is utopia. I mean, I'm presenting this as a real political option. I don't think the Palestinians see it that way yet. And that's our job, is to convince them that this isn't utopia. And then I think, you know, we can adapt the strategy of the ANC and go to the international civil, because public opinion has changed in the world in favor of the Palestinians. But it still doesn't have an ask. Again, you go to your member of parliament and they say, what do you want? What are you going to say? End the occupation? I mean, that's a slogan. You know, you got to say, this is what I want. Or something, you know, and then you can really begin to change government policies and create a situation simply in which Israeli apartheid is unsustainable. That's, you know, unfortunately, without the participation of the Israeli Jewish public. They're not going to participate in that. On the other hand, just one more sentence, and that is what was important was that in 1955 the ANC issued the Freedom Charter that said our vision of South Africa after apartheid is inclusive. We're all South Africans. And that was embodied in the Constitution. Now that didn't convince the white South Africans, you know, to support the ANC by any means. But when it finally happened, that the collapse happened, that's what made the transition possible. Because the whites saw that they were a part of the new South Africa. And I think we're trying to do, that's the collective rights thing here. We have to show Israelis that they're a part of the new country. This is inclusive. It's not going to convince them. But when that day comes, when hopefully they have no choice, they'll be willing, you know, grudgingly, but they'll be willing to go into the new state because they see that it's not against them, that in fact it's inclusive.
Yes, my name is Jan Hamburger. I'm a member of the same organization of Mrs. Meyer, A Different Jewish Voice. Jeff, thank you very much for your idealistic and realistic approach. I couldn't agree more, but I have one objection that I would like to bring forward. Too easily, in my eyes, you dismissed international law as separated from this political process, this end game, as you said. Okay, let's not speak about international law, let's speak about law. What else is this political process, this end game, as trying to realize equality before the law, which is a very judicial concept. So your political process, in my view, is completely connected to judicial concepts, and I would say also to international law, but we could leave that out. I would like to have an answer on the first thesis. It's connected to law. as much as it can be.
For sure, don't misunderstand me. Actually, Article 8 of our program is a commitment to human rights, justice, and peace, and international law. International law is a crucial element, and we should be followed. I mean, I don't reject international law. I'd love it to be the way the world runs. I'm just understand that it isn't. So I think that simply the way I would put it, international law and human rights has to be an element in our vision, in our plan, in our structure, for sure. It has to inform the way we're restructuring this new society. But it's not enough. It's not enough, and it can't be a replacement for a political program. It has to go together with a political program. Last but not least.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
One quick answer.
One quick answer.
Okay, I agree with you. An interesting comparison with the ANC, but I see some very differences between ANC and the Israeli situation as well. One of them is that the white leadership in South Africa realized that they were in an economical, very difficult situation if they would continue apartheid, because they were becoming isolated and a pariah state. Now, I have the impression that Israel knows they're a pariah state, but they don't care, as long as the United States pays the bills for them, which is another question. Another thing is that about leadership, I agree there is no Mandela right now for the Palestinians, but I don't see a de Klerk any. And we probably wouldn't have known Mandela for what he is, what he has become, if there hadn't been a de Klerk that gave him the space to come out and be a leader. See, so I'm a little more pessimistic about when I make the comparison. I hope there is an international community realizing that it can't continue like this, but I see some differences.
I will answer a part. In fact, as a Palestinian, I don't want really to take totally the South African, program for us. I will give you one example. In 91, it's the war declared the end of apartheid in South Africa. It's right. 2001 was the first time I was there for this international conference against racism. And 2 days later, when we were there, it was the Landless People Day, People come from all regions, like hundreds, thousands of people, sleep in the streets to demand, to manifest that still 10 years after the end of apartheid, and the courts give them reason to get back their lands and houses, and they still fight. You understand what I mean? I returned back 7 times, and not last year, the year before in November 2017 in November, and it's still the same, But this doesn't mean that we should not build something more reliable, It's like, I don't want the international community to declare, now Palestine is a state. So, oh my God, it's like, okay, Sweden recognized Palestinian, and I would love to have a real state in the ground. I don't want just a recognition of something that doesn't exist in reality. You understand what I mean? So this is why I could take some parts, which when we took the issue of BDS, when we called churches to call for hope, their message of hope. Otherwise, why the Christian of the world, they never try to help the Palestinian Christian, my God. Even the churches, they never play any role, any positive role. The only positive role they play? When any Christian apply for visa or to immigrate, then 10 days later, they got visa, immigration, house, whatever you want. Because they want to make the region empty of Christians. Because they want to transfer our, conflict between Muslim and Jewish. This is what the Israelis play as a role, So this is why many of the Christians of the region, they understand very well what's happened. But I don't know until when they can support. in March, one of the organizations called Saint Eve, they come with two men that they lost their lands. You know, their land, it's called Kremizan, which is belong to the church. Can you imagine, during 10 years, you can ask your representative in Geneva. We met with them, we explain, we do presentation, we inform them about the danger if the Israelis confiscate the land of the church. It belongs to the church, you know. And nothing. They keep, taking notes. And in March, when we told them, you remember, sir? And he couldn't look to us in the eyes. The land confiscated, the wall was built, and two families, the organization, they bring two men, one 46 and the other 70. The one of 70 years old, he was crying. He said, okay, my sons, they left to Ecuador, they got visa, and now they are immigrant, they got nationality after 3 years. But my God, I born here. I work in the land, and now my land confiscated. What should I become? My sons are my trees, and I lost them. The other guy, the 47 years old, he got, I think residency somewhere in Mexico, etc. He said, I'm still young, I will go. Yeah. So this is the only really positive role the Christians of the world play. Just to make empty, and to have this, instead of supporting them to stay in their land. And I remember I cried with the Swiss, I told them, please, help us to keep this land. It's the only place where we could produce a very good wine, it's just to touch this sensibility, but they don't care, So the political will is very important, international law as well, very important. So this is one of the issues I want to highlight.
Just really quickly, Israel isn't as strong in my view as it appears to be. Israel is strong among governments. I wrote a book called War Against the People that tries to explain that. Israel has a very sophisticated military security surveillance technology system, technologies of repression, and it's all over the world. Israel has a much greater global reach than the United States does in terms of this, because Israel not only deals with every country in the world, including countries that have no diplomatic relations with it, but it's deeper than the U.S. The U.S. has bases all over. Israel works with your security services and your secret police and your regular police, including here in the Netherlands. So it's a much deeper penetration. Israel is the number 2 arms supplier to China. So Israel's not exactly a client of the U.S. It would jump ship on the U.S. in a minute to China if it felt that the U.S. is sinking. In other words, it's very. But what I'm saying is that support is fairly shallow, because I don't think Israel has the public opinion behind it. I think this whole campaign of vilifying Jeremy Corbyn and this whole anti-Semitism thing, criticizing Israel's anti-Semitism, that's a desperation. That's not coming out of strength. That's where you can't argue your case anymore, and all you have left is to vilify people and intimidate them and create these, so I think we have to take that as a sign of weakness, actually. Now, it speaks to governments again, because governments, it's easy for Israel to buy off governments. It's got, you're talking about billions of dollars in technologies and all that kind of stuff. But, if we can affect public opinion, but affect public opinion in a focused way, with an actual end game, is what I'm saying. We can change governments. We can change government policies, because in the end, the governments aren't going to. There's already a disconnect between European governments and public opinion, and we can really. That's a tremendous wedge that we can use if we're strategic. So I think that in fact Israel is vulnerable, of the BDS movement, because we've always supported BDS. It's mainly BD. We're not doing the S very much. And it's the S the sanctions that has to do with intergovernmental things. So the focus should be, I've always criticized, I'll be honest with you, the targeting of BDS. They're targeting Motorola, they're targeting SodaStream and all these. They should be targeting the arms trade. They should be targeting the police training here. You should take Amsterdam, for example, or Holland, and look at where is Israel, in this sense, invested. In what universities? Some of your universities work with the Technion, which is Israel's polytechnic, which is the laboratory of the IDF. A lot of these weapon systems, the worst ones, are being developed by the Technion that has, at least with one, if not more, Dutch universities, has a working relationship. What research projects with Israel are Dutch universities or Dutch companies involved with? Joint production. I mean, here's where Arella Grassini could help out as well, who's here. I mean, there's all, so that's what BDS should really be focusing on, is the S part. Because that's what Israel doesn't care if you don't buy its avocados. That's not a big deal. You don't buy SodaStream. Israel, but if you begin to focus on arms and technologies of repression, that's much more serious. Because first of all, it affects public opinion. You begin to see our in ICAD, what we say, our line is, we're all Palestinians. As your, not just armies, as your police forces get Israelized in their training and in their weaponry and so on, you're becoming Palestinianized. Don't think the people in Gaza are the end. Israel's not developing these weapon systems for Gaza. The people in Gaza are the guinea pigs. That's the laboratory. You're the end users. You're the customers. Israel's developing these weapons for export. And is exporting them here. So if we can bring that home, in other words, what we try to say to people is it's great if you care about Palestinians. It's great if you care about human rights and international law and all that stuff. But there's a self-interest thing here too. And that is that the occupation is coming to your community. One more sentence. Israel is selling not just weapons and technologies of repression. It's selling an entire concept of a security state. Israel is saying to European countries in particular, you can be democracies, like we are, but security has to trump everything. Everything has to be subordinate to security, and we'll show you how we've developed a model in Israel. You know what Israel says to Europe? Israel says to Europe, you're worried about a couple Muslim neighborhoods or North African neighborhoods in your cities that are creating problems. You shouldn't be criticizing us in Israel for our occupation. You should be imitating us. Because look what we've done. We have a country that's a flourishing democracy for our people, flourishing economy, in a country where at personal safety for our people. You go to the Eurovision in Tel Aviv, or you go walk around coffee shops in Jerusalem, people aren't looking over their shoulders worrying about terrorism. Complete personal safety. All of that in a country in which half the population are terrorists. Not just a couple neighborhoods. Well, if we can do that, imagine what we could do for you in Europe. So there's really a very insidious, dangerous model of a future society with very highly sophisticated technologies of repression that Israel is exporting. I call it global Palestine. And that should be a part of our messaging, because that's what brings it home. Now it's just not a matter of the poor Palestinians, it's a matter of how are we in Holland not just implicated, but how is it affecting our lives? And it is. I mean, Israel and China are the two countries, and they're very connected. And Israel is very involved with the whole Uyghur repression. These are the two countries that are the most sophisticated countries in technologies of repression. that have no constraints. There's no Supreme Court, there's no public opinion, there's no laws. So if you look at those two countries and you begin to get a sense of where the rest of the world is going, what our future is like, and it's a pretty scary future. So I think, we have to widen this thing and talk about a global Palestine, and that is the way to really begin to isolate Israel in public opinion. And I think that's Israel's fear, because if Israel can be portrayed as what it is, a technological superpower, especially in the area of repression and security, then that contrasts with the idea that we're just victims. You see, that adds that element of complicity and accountability that's crucial to our campaigning. So I don't think Israel is quite as strong as it appears.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, the microphones are running out of battery, so I think that's a sign that we should just
I think
leave
we're
it
running out of
there.
batteries too.
Exactly. I would like to thank you so very much for being here and engaging with us on this issue. Also that you have not just here, but been a part of the FIP speaking tour with a very intensive program throughout France as well. So we are very, very grateful to have you and to be the last ones to host you here. And also thank you to you for being here on a Sunday afternoon and for also asking really interesting and fascinating questions. So thank you very much, and a round of applause. Also, if you would like to know more about FIT, our organization, you're welcome to come up to us and ask questions or visit the website as well. Thank you.